That's such an interesting angle in terms of the three layers, and it makes intuitive sense, right? You got to collect the data, you got to aggregate the data, and then you engage with the data. And especially in the accounting world, to your point, is you're moving transactions, recording transactions between systems, and then obviously where I engage with the data is mostly on the reporting level. But the assumption is the data is correct, and that you have a system of record. I mean, Maxio in many ways is a system of record for billing and invoicing, and it's happening so fast, all the billing in such an enormous amount of data, that there's no way for any individual to go through and check every transaction. And so what was the insight that led you to think about the data not being accurate? Was it something in your background, or had you worked at another company, or how did you identify this as a problem? Because I think there are a lot of people out there that have no idea that the data might not be accurate.
I think you're so right. My background is I worked in 4 big companies in the office of the CFO, at least partially. And my background, I started as a CFO. I started as CFO of a startup. And then I had the opportunity and the privilege to work for 4 public big companies. One of them was Mercury Interactive. Another one was Hewlett Packard, who acquired us. Another one was Stanley Black & Decker. And the last one being Intuit. And actually, I saw many times, especially at Intuit, where we build complex payment systems, that, at the office of the CFO, where all the volume starts to become really transactional, high volume transactional data, then people really use the old tools they used to have, which is like BI and spreadsheets, in order to really validate and substantiate the data, which is all about, can we make sure the data, typically a transaction would flow through different systems. If Maxio is working on the kind of the order to cash side, so you have billing systems like yourself, and then you have the ERP, and sometimes you have payment gateways, and you have CRM. And how do you make sure that all the data is consistent? Now, the reason you want to make sure the data is consistent, I'd like to think, is for 3 reasons. First of all, you want to trust the data. Second of all, if there is any issue with the data, financial data is also money. You don't want to leave money on the table. The third reason is compliance. You need to do it because for compliance reasons, you need to constantly validate your data, and we can talk more about the changes in that respect. Now, I'd like to think that systems like Maxio, they do a fabulous job on accounting automation, saving a lot of manual work. But in the office of the CFO, you need to have 2 arms. You need to have the operational arm, which does things like Maxio, but you need to have the internal control arm, which checks everything. Now, if you're a public company CFO or CEO, you actually sign, by law, you need to sign on a certification every quarterly statement that you developed and maintain an internal control system, which is separate from like how you transact. Whether you transact manually or automatically, that's kind of your issue. But you developed a system that knows how to constantly check everything you kind of execute. And that's where we come into play. So I'd like to think that I've been able to see that myself when I experienced working in the office of the CFO, but it's all manual work. And guess what? A lot of things haven't changed over the years in the office of the CFO. Definitely things below the radar like internal controls. And that's where we see the opportunity.
Super interesting. I had a short stint as a public company CEO for about 2 years, and I remember signing the quarter, and you look at the CFO and you say, hey, I hope this is right. And he or she says yes, and you're like, okay. And you go through audits, but even the auditors don't have the ability at that time to dig in. It's just an enormous amount of data, especially at a public company. We have, Cambrian explosion of transactions and information that you got to process. And so this does seem like a really interesting use case for AI. And so help us understand, what is the process? We talked about in our pre-brief that there's like a 4 or 5 step process to be able to apply AI on this side of the problem, which is the internal control and compliance.
So I'd like to think that the way we kind of structure it is, first, a platform needs to get access to the data. So we can seamlessly integrate to a lot of systems, ERPs, billing, payment systems, CRM, spend management, HRIS, payroll. For each business process, you have its own systems. And then what we do is when we aggregate or collect all the data, using our proprietary technology, we arrange it in a graph database, which allows us to seamlessly link all the transactions from the various systems as if it was a single system. So we actually see the audit trail for each transaction across all the systems that process that same transaction, whether it's like a CRM the CRM or the billing or the ERP or the payment or whatever. And then our engines, our analytics engines, can actually process the data and ask the data questions. And using agentic AI, we have different agents who, again, arrange the data and then ask the data questions or run the controls in order to check the validity and the accuracy of the data. So guess what? If someone had, a bug in their API, and all of a sudden your closed won opportunities will transact differently in the billing system because you got the wrong information in the billing system, or from the billing system it got transact differently or booked differently in the ERP, we are able to check it and validate it. Now, even if everything is smooth and great, the need to be able to develop a system or a framework that does that across all your data is part of what the certification we mentioned earlier, or it's part of the legal requirement to generate internal controls over your financial reporting. And that's basically what we're doing. So a lot of companies, they're doing it today. And even if your systems are perfect, you still need to check it. But these checks today requires a lot of manual work, which we're replacing with AI. So the ability to take data completeness, data accuracy work is now something that we can fully automate and substantiate. Not only that, we can actually generate the workpapers and the documentations that people are generating manually using Gen AI. So we are not only checking it, we can also document it. And that replaces a lot of manual work.
And I think that's really one of the key insights we'll talk a little bit about. So just to summarize, there are really three steps at this stage. One is to define the operations, the processes, and the policies. The second one is to automate. And to that point, the AI that you have uses machine learning to structure the data. So you're also reducing the manual work to do that. And it's really this graph database that's pulling all things. It sort of reminds me of how people describe blockchain a little bit, is you're connecting all the transactions and having visibility to them. And then the third step that you were pointing to was that AI provides answers to discrepancies and does the documentation, because that's one of the things I think about AI. People have a lot of anxiety is it's a black box. You don't know how it's making the decisions it's making, right? You just trust it. And that's always my question is, well, how do you know AI is doing the right thing? And so help us understand just that point in particular in terms of perceived risk of not understanding why the decision was made by the agent that you're trusting, you're signing off on some Terminator agent that has made all these decisions for you. If you're the public company CFO, how do you
Totally
understand how the decisions are made?
That's a great question. So actually what we're doing is a combination of AI and rules. So the idea is that actually, let me answer you this. First of all, we are a read-only system. So we don't inject any data into your system. So a lot of the risk around AI is what happens when AI makes its own decision, but the data ends in your system. That's not what we do. We basically create insights. In order to avoid false positive, we surround the AI with rules that determines thresholds and things we may want you to look at or things which are not less important to look at.